The word was invented by a German Darwinian called Haeckel at the end of the 19th century. And it was this realization, following on from Darwin and Wallace, that life is an evolutionary process. We're all involved in it. My forms are related to my cat and to, all of life is like from one tree, so to speak, one evolutionary tree. And therefore we have to respect and care for the whole thing. And so I think I still think that's the way to go. In those days, the rhetoric was very much about what you can do as a person and voluntarily. You can simplify your life so you can become a vegetarian. You can take simpler forms of transport. You can make personal choices. You can descale your footprint, as it were. I think what's happened more recently, and that's the kind of green philosophy that I espoused and still do. What I think's happened more recently, and this is really weird, is that the corporate sector has used it as a tool to disempower people and to sort of enforce a rather scary and frightening view of the world, that the world is in catastrophe and unless you do this, this and this immediately, it's all going to fall apart. I don't think fear is the motivation for social transformation. And I still think that the eco-philosophers around that are working with love are the ones to listen to. I think Gandhi was a forerunner of certain aspects of eco-philosophy, and I've read books about Gandhi as a pioneer environmentalist. Arne Næss in Norway is another great eco-philosopher who influenced me. He was one of the founders of Peace Research as well. James Lovelock, a British scientist who talked about the Gaia hypothesis, also pioneer ecologist. And in Russia, when I went to Russia in 1990 to the Institute of Philosophy and talked to Russian intellectuals, how can we get peace? What's happening in Russia in the Green Movement, I said, and I was introduced to the leader of the Green Party in Moscow, and I remember going to his flat and having some fantastic conversations. They knew exactly the way to go. And they based a lot of their thinking on the work of Vernadsky, who was a pioneer Russian intellectual who invented the word the biosphere. He'd worked out as a chemist and geologist that, I'm breathing gases that the whole planet breathes in a sort of cycle. And if I'm polluting them, the whole thing's polluted. So there were some great green thinkers. And I also interviewed a guy who was professor of philosophy in Moscow University at the time. And he'd written a book, incognito, called The Destruction of Nature in the Soviet Union, which was about how Stalin's mega-industrialization programs had ruined nature. He destroyed the kind of Aral Sea, turned it into a dust bowl, because he had this megalomaniac idea that man's better than nature, we're all humanists, we're all good Marxists, we can do what we want with nature. So if we want, to build a canal there, we'll do it now, immediately. I don't care if 50,000 people die doing it, we've got lots of people. That sort of arrogance, that hubris, is what I think this guy wrote against. And it influenced the leader, Gorbachev. And then, of course, as we know, the horrible events of the nuclear explosion took place in Ukraine around that time, when it was brought home to us forcibly that a nuclear accident in country X is going to affect all the neighbouring countries. So this nuclear cloud spread from Chernobyl all the way to Sweden and Britain and France, and people still have got cancers and things as a result. So I think Gorbachev was shocked by that. And I know from people that met him and worked with him, and my philosophy friend that I met in Moscow knew Gorbachev personally, and he basically turned green, the same as I'd done in his thinking. And that's why he brought about the end of the nuclear arms race. He said we can't afford, not only can we not afford nuclear war between Britain, America and Russia, we can't afford to go on stockpiling all these weapons because they're going to go off accidentally. So he became a green peace activist, actually, Gorbachev. Most people don't realise that. He set up a thing called the Green Cross, which was to be like the Red Cross, only for environmental disasters. So it would have people on standby if there was a terrible forest fire or something. They could send the Green Cross in to help solve it. That's still going. A friend of mine sits on the board, although Gorbachev sadly is gone. So and Spinoza was one of the key intellectuals who said that all of nature is the extension of God. So this idea that God is something separate from nature, I think the green philosophy tradition that I come from, we challenge that. We say, what's the point of a God that's like nowhere to be seen or found? If God is in nature, then we can work with that force or energy. And surely that force or energy wants our well-being. Anyway, so that's kind of my kind of version of green philosophy, which I've written about. And I also think Aristotle can be regarded as a founding father of eco-philosophy because he loved nature. He was the inventor of natural sciences. He invented zoology, biology. He wanted to know what is life, what is the telos. And he didn't agree with pure idealism. So pure idealism is great, you float away and live in the spirit world. But we have bodies, and we need to eat, and we have animals, and we have mountains and trees and rivers. And that's nature, and we should love that too, whilst we're here. That was Aristotle's point, and I kind of agree with that. As for your question about the World Economic Forum, I can't possibly comment. I haven't got a clue what triggers them. I'm sure there are some good people involved with it who think like I'm trying to talk about. I've met one or two who've been to those meetings, and I think they go for the good reasons. I know there's a lot of critique of them, and I think their PR is terrible. They are not promoting their work effectively. I think they should reform and call themselves the World Ecological Forum, and I'll put me in charge of the philosophy division, because at the moment they're not getting it right, and by making it so expensive to go to, they're only attracting a sort of manipulative elite who just want to kind of carve up the world for their own power sakes, which is wrong, because good ideas can come from anyone, however poor, humble, or simple, because the spark of genius falls where it falls. I mean, take Leonardo da Vinci. He was an illegitimate, no formal education to speak of, and yet one of the greatest minds of the Renaissance. Okay, is that sufficient? Yeah, that is my little take on that one. Right. Okay, shall I do one?
Yes, maybe, excuse me,
Yeah.
one question.
Okay, go for it, yeah.
I heard that there is not only Davos meetings for the World Economic Forum, but every year they are doing, maybe in September, in China, the Davos of East Asia. So it's a kind of really deep globalization above the, I will say in French, la concurrence between the US and China, for example. It seems that some people, they are above that. In that context of preparing tomorrow's world, with maybe agreement on trade, but I always wonder what is in the mind of people, because trade is a consequence. I see it as a consequence, not as a goal by itself, especially with the US, with people have beliefs, and in China also with a deep tradition. Even
well, we had a Chinese guest here, didn't we, just last week?
Yes.
From Hong Kong.
Yes.
I do know that the World Economic Forum is having regional meetings. I don't know if there's one in Africa. I think their idea is to centralize. probably because of the criticism that's been hurled at them that they're all mega maniacs that want to centralise everything. So their response is to say, well, we'll have little local meetings. You know, I think there's a certain type of mind or a certain type of troll in Petersburg, and there's probably about 10,000 people posting regularly against the World Economic Forum as elite, capitalist, you know, not interested in normal people, sort of posting really extremist anti-memes against them, just as they're doing against Freemasons, say. And I don't think that's helpful. As far as I can tell, the World Economic Forum and similar groups are doing their best to get a conversation going among the world's thought leaders. And in their case, they're trying to get thought leaders who are also political activists, you know. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think somebody's got to do that. And as you know, I'm chairman of, like, one of the rivals to the World Economic Forum is our World Intellectual Forum. We were set up in India in 2017 to bring intellectuals of the world together who aren't rich and statesmen. I mean, we might be, but, you know, that's not the criteria of membership. Anyone that wants to save the world and has good ideas about how we can do that is welcome to our meetings. I chair them monthly. And I think, you know, obviously I think we're much better than the World Economic Forum because we're open to people, we're not secretive. And our agenda is 100% peace. You know, I would like to see more peace talked about in the World Economic Forum. I'd like to see the leaders of it challenging these government people that come and saying, when are you going to cut your, you know, budget of weaponry down to 50% of what it is? I'd like to see those kind of conversations happening in Davos more. It's funny, I've never been invited. Perhaps because they realise that that's what I'd only come if we could have those kind of conversations, you know. But peace seems to be off the agenda. They talk about development, but that can mean we'll give you loads of money, we'll build up your arms industry, and you join our team, whether you're Russia or America. Well, I think we've got to challenge that sort of bipolar way of thinking. We've got to make a leap forward to thinking of the design for a peace world in which these blocs are no longer rivals. I mean, I've actually come up with an idea recently in a book I'm writing. A lot of problems would be solved if NATO offered Russia and China partnership in a program called Partnerships for Peace. For instance, Ireland is a member of Partnerships for Peace. They refuse to be a member of NATO because they're neutral, they don't want to join it. But by becoming a member of Partnerships for Peace, they work with NATO countries on specific projects like, you know, could be anything. And why can't we offer that to Russia and China so that they stop being so anti-NATO and belligerent and realise that we're all part of the same team here? I don't think there's any force on the planet can defeat NATO, which is the largest, most powerful military thing ever created in human history. So let's just accept that and work with it and transform it from within into a peace orientation. So that NATO becomes a force for good and for peace rather than war. I mean, France is a member of NATO as well. But anyway, and that sort of thing could be discussed at the World Economic Forum, how we can accept the military but then transform it from within into something that is a force for good. And what better way to do that than invite your enemies to become your friends? You know. Anyway, that's an off-the-cuff response to your question. Okay, look, let's move on. I don't think there's time for me to choose one, because I want to move on to the tarot of the gods. And we'll have a look at this. So just a word about the tarot for those that don't know. I mean, the tarot are interesting. We know we can trace their genealogy back to the Italian Renaissance. First packs of tarot appeared. But some say they came into the Renaissance from even older sources, possibly brought by gypsies from Egypt, and that they were a carrying the information load of the ancient pagans of Egypt, and they did a lot of teaching through symbols and visual arts. You know, even their alphabet was sort of pictures, and so this idea became popular. And in the 18th century in France, an amazing French intellectual called Antoine Cor de Gebelin, who was a Freemason in Paris, and he was the secretary of the Lodge of the Nine Sisters. He wrote this amazing book, which I've seen in French, 8 volumes. It's called Le Monde Primitif Comparé avec le Monde Moderne. And he went into all the ancient religions and philosophies that he knew about, and we're talking like 1780, and compared them to what is known now in the modern world. It was a masterpiece of a book. And in one of the books, which he dedicated, by the way, to the Queen, Marie Antoinette, he was a friend of hers, although he was a liberal, he was still keeping, good ties with the court. Unfortunately, she died before the final volume was published. It's rather sad. She was executed by the revolutionary mob, which he didn't agree with. But anyway, in one of the chapters of his book, he talks about the tarot and their provenance, and he says these amazing cards come from ancient Egypt, and they tell the ancient cosmology of the ancient world. And we're fortunate to have them. Anyway, many other writers have written about the origin of the tarot. These 2 volumes, which I spent a couple of years writing for this book, are I think, the largest attempt to make sense of the tarot by a modern intellectual. I've not found anything this in-depth. I've gone into all possible explanations of where the tarot come from. There's a new theory that they come from the Mithraic tradition, for instance, of the Persian religion, which is the purple ones. Mithraism is number 120 on the board, to do with Mithras, who was the god of light. And I explore in the tarot card on Mithras, the god, about that. Because the one author has said that the Mithraic tradition was sort of married with the Hermetic, which was the Egyptian, and that was the origin of the tarot. It's a mystery. But what I've done for the first time in history is have a tarot deck dedicated to the male gods, because I feel they're not. Everyone who's interested in the tarot and esoteric stuff is very much into the goddess, which is lovely. I love the goddess myself. I'm a goddess worshipper. But I think the gods are important too. And gods and goddesses go together. We can't have one without the other. And if we neglect the gods, they all go crazy, because the male energy gets frustrated and it comes out as violence. So the point of doing the Tarot of the Gods is to educate my male friends and relatives on this planet, of which there's about 4 billion, to come into our full masculinity, our full godhead, so that we act responsibly. And that doesn't mean acting like crazy warriors, killing each other. Men for too long have got away with thinking that killing is what defines you as a man. I don't agree with that. I think, yes, defence is important. We should all learn a few martial arts, but to be a man is not to just be a killer. On the contrary, it gives men a bad name, I think. So that's why I did the Tarot of the Gods. And what we do each philosophy club is we choose 2 or 3. So do you want to shuffle them up? And then just choose one at random, and we'll see what shows up. And really it's just asking what light can the gods send us on this day, on Sunday the 4th of August, I believe, 2 days before Hiroshima Day. Yes.
And then you said...
Good. Yeah, just open at random, midway through, and choose the one that you're drawn to. Okay, and then hand them on to Carmel. Good.
Thank you.
Right. All right. Right. Well, we've got three interesting gods here. What's your one?
3 of fire, Hephaestus.
Right. Yes, or Vulcan, he's called as well. So the Tower of the Gods is divided into 4 suits: earth, air, fire, and water. And the suit of fire is this one, number 3. And Hephaestus is a famous Greek deity who was the blacksmith of the gods. I'm sure you know of Hephaestus. And he has some interesting myths. And also in his form as Vulcan in the Roman religion, because I include both in the text. I think my reading why he's important now is because engineers love making weapons. You know, they love getting metal out of the ground and forging missiles and guns and tanks, and it's something we do as humans. We're very clever at creating stuff, and it's because we have these hands that have an opposable thumb. Anthropologists, physical anthropologists will say that's the secret of humanity. It's our fingers and our hands, and hands are really important to humans. And that's why we can make stuff, and we can make complicated stuff using metal like this. And, you know, from there we go on to making weapons and satellites and nuclear weapons. And I want to calm Hephaestus down and give him a new job. You know, he shouldn't have to make weapons anymore. He is, after all, and this is an interesting bit, he is, after all, married to Aphrodite, the most beautiful of all the goddesses. What's not to love? The fact is, she was unfaithful to him with a number of other gods and even mortals. So there's a deep down sort of, Hephaestus isn't really happy. So he takes out his frustration in making stuff. And she also, Aphrodite, went off and had an affair with Ares, the god of war, which didn't cheer up Hephaestus either. The other thing about him is he was born slightly lame, and he was thrown out of heaven by Hera when he was born, and he was cast down, and he would have died, but he was rescued and looked after by some of the other gods. So, you know, there's a lot there about how to, I mean, it's the kind of geek that is absolutely useless at social interaction, whose girlfriend is always going off having affairs with other people, and who puts all their time and energy into making stuff on the internet, hacking and causing mayhem, and their idea of a thrill is to hack NATO and crash it for a day, you know. That's the Hephaestus energy, which I think needs transforming into something beautiful. Let us make things that are beautiful and that can be pro-life. I mean, blacksmithing was really important in the Anglo-Saxon culture. The smith is one of the most common names in English, John Smith, because they were really important to the culture. And especially when, you know, the horse was our main transport system. So, to me, it's about, we were talking about this earlier, about how militarism can be, the fangs taken out of it, and it can be humanised and turned into something good. So all the intelligence that goes towards manufacturing weapons could actually go into manufacturing peace things. Which is why I've come up with the idea of the Nonagon, which is a 9-sided building to go on top of the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., on the Potomac River. It came to me after attending a Leonardo da Vinci day here, and we had lectures on Leonardo, and he's buried at Amboise. We went to the grave, and I received this idea as a download from Leonardo. It's the only way I can describe it. Because he was grumbling that in his day, you had to work for the military to have any income, or a secure income. he loved doing pictures of beautiful women, but he didn't get enough commissions. So for a steady job, he had to work for the Borgias and the Duke of Milan to design weapons for them. And what I realised doing all the research is that's what our geniuses of today are having to do. They're having to work for the Pentagon and its equivalents worldwide to get a decent income. Well, I'd like to reverse that. I want them to work for the Nonagon, which is a 9-sided building, the American Ministry of Peace, or Department of Peace building, which would be physically on top of the Pentagon. And I've got this project called the Leonardo da Vinci Peace Prize to be awarded to the architect that designs it. So, and that would house all the kind of creative things we can do for peace in America. And there'd be one in France, there'd be one in Britain, in Russia, in China. We need to get the Leonardos of today working on that stuff. Like even things like how to get all the landmines that are in the soil up, because they're still blowing up kids. And we can design equipment that can detect them and disable them. How to get rid of the nuclear waste that's being dumped in the North Sea and the English Channel, which is in rusting tin drums, which are now leaking and pumping out radioactive stuff into the seas. How do you get them up? That's work for a peace department to think through. How do we design, maybe using AI, very very intelligent diplomatic mediation tools, so that Hamas can talk to Israel and they can say, these are our terms, this is the 10 things we can't say, any deal has to include, and the other guy says that, and then the AI says, okay, you've got to do this. This is the only solution. Because it seems to be something that we need to devote our minds to doing super intelligent peace diplomacy. And since we've invented AI, let's use it for that. And the minds that could do all that would work for the Nonagon. They'd be the Leonardos of today. So anyway, that's kind of, and I think that's what Hephaestus wants. I'm doing this under his auspices, you see. Yeah.
I have a question.
Go for it.
Not using artificial intelligence, but praying God to inspire people. It's funny. It's like a God above the God, because Hephaestus is as a like the Jungian shadow.
An archetype.
And among the gods, who can help? Zeus? Or another one?
Well, let's go on to your one. Yes. So we've looked at the Hephaestus god, and Vulcan and Govan is the Celtic Druid equivalent. We had a Hephaestus type god. But let's look at the next one, because your question is very important. Who can sort all this out? Who's the top man we need to talk to? Okay.
Where is the boss?
Where's the boss? Yeah, because this planet's going down. We need to talk to the boss, right? And in most religions, there is a kind of someone in charge. There is a boss. In the classical world, he was called Zeus. And in the Roman Latin world, Jupiter. But it's the same god. In the Celtic world, he was often called Tyrannus, in fact, but he has his own card. So I love this idea of the gods on Mount Olympus, the most beautiful place. I've not physically been up Mount Olympus. I've been to the base of it, where there's an ancient town called Dion, which is where Alexander the Great went to pray before he set off to Persia, to ask for the blessings of the gods on his trip. And there's a big theatre in the classical world there. I've written a play which could be staged in the theatre at Dion one day, about how to prevent the end of the world. But so I didn't make it up to the top of Mount Olympus, because that's the land of the gods. Yes. When I went to Gladstone's library in Wales, Gladstone was a great Liberal Prime Minister in Britain. He left his huge library to the nation, and it's a study centre where you can go. And when I was there browsing on the shelves, he had this amazing 2-volume work on Zeus, written in about 1905, maybe a bit earlier. It's an academic study of Zeus in art, literature, poetry, archaeology. And I thought, trust Gladstone to have that book, because he was a classical scholar and a friend of Schliemann, who discovered Troy, and Mycenae, great archaeologist. So I have a lot of respect for Zeus. Obviously, he's the father of the 9 muses, and as a Platonic philosopher, I worship the 9 muses. So this is their father. So I have to keep on good terms with him. And when I went to Crete and had an amazing working holiday there as a poet, I wrote 13 poems in what I call my Cretan cycle. I was absolutely blown away by the beauty of Crete. And that's where Zeus was born. If you haven't been to Crete, go. Everybody should go at least once in your lifetime. And I was taken up beyond Knossos by a friend to this secret remote church dedicated to Saint Peace, Agia Irini, Saint Peace. And it's the most beautiful place. And from there you can look up to the mountains, and somewhere up there in the cave is where Zeus was born. And you can just feel it intangibly. It's like you're taken back to being a Bronze Age person thinking. And I know that some people say it's wrong to put faces on the divine. We should worship the divine as a purely impersonal spirit. I think actually it's quite sweet to put faces on, like the Greeks did. They used to costume the impersonal, abstract, absolute, and they gave it a picture language. And Hegel talks about this. Yes, of course, the spirit is invisible and impersonal, but our little minds can't figure that out. We need something to hook onto, to worship. Like when we're children, we worship our little animal toys because we can relate to them. It's the same as adults. And for me, Zeus he's the god of thunder and lightning. He's ultimately the god of justice. And he's the god of fertility, because although Hera didn't really like it, he's always going around, creating new life. And all the muses wouldn't be there. So we honour his male energy, his love of women and goddesses. I think now he also led the fight against the Titans, who were blocking humanity from achieving anything in Greek mythology. How we're going to interpret that, is it I think Jane Harrison, a Cambridge scholar, wrote about how we're supposed to make sense of Greek mythology. Should we use the tools of anthropology to explain primitive tribes people at that time thought in these ways? I think we can see him as a liberator, and he brought into being, civilization. I think the one black mark I would put against him is his treatment of Prometheus. Because Prometheus was a titan who brought fire to mankind. And according to the Athenians, Prometheus and Athena created mankind. And Zeus had an ambivalent relationship with mankind and with Prometheus. So there are... Possibly it's because Zeus didn't like his daughter Athena having an affair with Prometheus. She was supposed to be the virgin queen, but secretly was in love with the god of fire, who was helping man. There are mysteries here that we could explain psychologically or anthropologically, perhaps. In the 18th century, romantic rebels befriended Prometheus and opposed